Hi everybody on the vinyl community, John back. I'm going to make a video now about albums that I first heard in other people's homes. It's kind of a follow-up thread response to one of James Griffiths' most recent videos. Quite an interesting idea, James. The moment I saw this, I started thinking over all of the people I could think where I'd listened to music in their house for the first time. And although I keep on sort of finding others that I'd just completely forgotten about, it feels like it's fairly sparse, I must say. Although, yeah, it gets less and less these days. So I'm going to start off with showing this record. This is Depeche Mode, Black Celebration. So it's a very good friend of mine, sadly died now. Well, he died, I think, in 1996, quite some time ago. We went to school together and went to foundation and our college together. But I I met him at secondary school, comprehensive, and he was quite special because he moved into the area where I lived in Essex from a place in Marlborough. And so he was very much a sort of a country lad, and although Essex can be fairly rural, it's not the kind of rural that he would have been used to. And anyway, so become good friends of him, and he asked me if I'd go to a concert with him, and I'd never been to a concert before, so quite a young teenager. Can't see when this came out, but it must have been sometime in mid-80s, I suppose. And yeah, it meant getting on a train and going into London without grown-ups and things, so that was kind of a big adventure. And it was the Black Celebration tour that was happening, and we got tickets and we went in together and watched it at Wembley Arena. But before that, I spent a good amount of time listening to this at his house. I wasn't sure if it was really a band for me, but through that process I really sort of come to love this album. Sadly, when my friend Daniel died, his sister, I met up with her just a few years ago. She gave me his, a large part of his, what was left of his record collection, which was really kind of her. And he had all sorts of, Depeche Mode 12 inches and things. So that was a nice thing to get. So that's the first album that comes to mind that I learnt and listened to in somebody else's house. Another friend of both me and Daniel, or me and Ollie, we used to call him Ollie because that was his sort of name, was a chap called Anton. I've spoken about him before together with Ollie because we used to play sort of music together in his barn. Anyway, so Anton was very much a big influence on some of the things that I listened to too. This is Spirit of Eden by Talk Talk. And I can remember sitting in his bedroom, and he was recording this for me. That's what I'd given him a cassette, and he'd recorded a Sting album, I believe. And he said, "Well, do you want to put on the B-side?" And I said, "Oh, what have you got?" And he'd recently bought this, and he put it on. Yeah, okay, that'd be great. I'll have that on the other side. And it was really quite unusual at the time, especially for the lad that I was listening to this. It was sort of very abstract, and I had it on a cassette and I played it in my car. That's where I learnt to like this particular album. And so Anton, that was an album that he brought to my attention in his house, and I haven't looked back. I mean, it's such a shame that they've finished, and it's a shame that Mark Collis has died. They'll never get back together again now. It's a shame because they could have made so much more amazing music, but I guess the point with Mark Collis was that he'd done all he needed to do. He didn't need to do any more, so he didn't There you go. Another lad in school. It wasn't really somebody, not someone that I would have sort of listed as a friend. Not that he wasn't a friend, he was just another kid in school. Um, when Brothers in Arms came out, and it was a big, huge record. It was on everybody's lips, and yeah, CDs were new and everything. This kid, Nigel Page, I think his name was. It was sort of said that he had other Dire Straits albums, and I mean, for us at the time, we hadn't really heard Dire Straits before, and I think a lot of kids were giving him a cassette to say, can you record the another Dire Straits album for me, sort of thing. Anyway, I had a tape, and I said to him once, would you mind recording a Dire Straits album for me on this? And it led on to, I went round to his place, I think after school, I think that's what it was. And he lived quite close, and he put a record on and asked me, which one I'd be interested in having. And I said, I don't know, whichever. And the one that he recorded for me was this. This is Dire Straits Making Movies. It was a strange experience for me, because going into Nigel Page's house, it seemed in many ways so alien to me, because they had this really quite nice looking record player. I mean, it was the old style, with the record player and a tape deck on the side and the radio dial at the front. But he had some big speakers on it, sort of that big sort of thing, and they were sort of spaced quite properly in the living room, I suppose. And there was sort of a bunch of records there, but I could also see quite a few more somewhere else in a shelf. And that's what really threw me, because it seemed like, well, wow, lots of records, and it's in your front room. Like, my first instinct was like, well, don't your mum and dad mind you playing music? And then it dawned on me, okay, it's his mum and dad's records. And that's why it became such a strange experience, because I don't think I'd experienced that up until that point. I think grown-ups, or mums and dads, were people that told you to turn the music down. They were people that they didn't have time to listen to records or music. That was the stuff of kids, and they wanted to put the news on or whatever. And it was sort of this kind of revelation, like, wow, Nigel's got grown-up parents that obviously enjoy listening to music to the point where they've got a record player set up nicely and a big stack of records that look really interesting, and they were listening to quality stuff like Dire Straits. So that was a big experience for me. But I remember listening to this when I was sort of having all these thoughts in his front room, thinking, wow, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It just felt so unusual. And okay, we made my family sort of made friends with a young man, lived a couple of doors along. It was sort of like a lodging house, I suppose, where this chap lived. I can't quite remember how we got connected with him. I think he just turned up one day. Mum invited him around for dinner or something. But he lived in this lodging house. I think I would have been about 17 at the time, and he was about 10 years older than me, so 26, 27, I suppose. And he went round to his sort of room in his lodging house, and he used to play ELO, and he used to speak quite a lot about ELO. I remember at the time, not really knowing who ELO was, but going to his house or going to his room and listening to this. He used to have the bass turn up really high. He liked that. And he kind of had this continuous dialogue about Electric Light Orchestra, a New World record, and out of the blue, like it was his purpose in life to kind of work out which one he liked most. And I think, to be honest with you, he liked both of them, but for whatever reason, it was his struggle to kind of decide which one he liked more. Um, and so, yeah, as I got to know Chris, while he was sort of talking about all these things, I learned a little bit about ELO music, and particularly these two records. So after I'd finished studying in Essex foundation course, I went off to Portsmouth to study graphic design, or two-dimensional visual communication, as it was called then. And the first term I lived in a flat, actually, that was, I thought, was owned by this woman, Maria, who lived just a short way away from where I had to go every day. And it was so that her daughter, her eldest daughter, had left home and moved to Australia. That's right. So she had a spare bedroom, and that's what she was renting out to a student, hence me. And yeah, so that was sort of quite an interesting time. It was the first time for me to sort of move away from home and live outside of my family home that I'd lived in all my life. It smelt of potpourri, very pink. And I remember Maria, she was from Liverpool, so she had a Liverpudlian accent. But her daughter had left all sorts of stuff behind, because, you know, like you do when you move to Australia. But particularly, she'd left her records stacked up against the wall. And being the young man that I was, showed an interest in that. And I discovered a lot of music through that, and that was really great. But one of the biggest things that I first listened to was this. This is Yes, Fragile. And yeah, it was new to me. And really quite special. I don't really know what I could say. It's nice. You know. So this is where the first time I sort of encountered anything by Roger Dean, his cover. And as a sort of design student, I paid a lot of interest in that. But yeah, listening to Yes was yeah, really quite special. You know, I guess you don't really kind of forget that, do you, once you've done it? I mean, it's quite complex music, and although it's particularly this record and the ones around about this time were very accessible, I suppose, even though it's quite complex. So that was the first place where I sort of discovered Yes. Now, sadly, I lived there for one term, and then towards the end of the term, it turned out that this Maria, it was actually a council flat, and she didn't have the right to have tenants there, and she got caught out for connecting the gas pipes up. So her gas was on a meter, and you know, the meter turns round, and then she had to pay at the end of a certain period how much gas she'd used. She got some plumber friend to come in and just join the pipes up, take the meter out and join the pipes. So she was using gas and not really paying for it. And one day, you know, the gas board turned up on the door and with a policeman, and went in, and she got caught out. So I had to quickly move out, and luckily this happened at the end of the term. So in that first term at college, I'd been becoming very friendly with a chap called Rick Allen from Sevenoaks. He was also studying what I was studying, and he lived in a big old house closer to the seafront in Portsmouth. And I used to pop around his house occasionally and things, and yeah, it was really cool. It was like the young one's house, really. And in his room, he had his record collection, and I'd never seen anything quite like that before. It was all sorts of 60s and 70s records, which was, different, far away from what I understand. The album I'm going to show in relation to Rick Allen is this. He had this album, and it's a Steve Howe. I think it's Steve Howe's first solo release. And whenever I listen to this, it always reminds me of that time living in that house on the seafront. The arguments that everybody used to have about taking the rubbish out or doing the washing up or paying the electricity bill, that sort of stuff. But a lot of happy memories from this. So and this kind of cemented my sort of passage into Yes. Great record. I recommend this one. It's really good. After I'd finished studying, I moved back home to Essex. It was quite tough, and one of the very first jobs I got, I think my mum sort of set me up for this, was to work in a psychiatric hospital. And it was quite a life experience, I suppose. I was only there a year or so, but I always remember there was a patient there, and this was like a locked psychiatric ward. So it's people that sort of suffer with quite intense schizophrenia and so on. There was one particular character there that was perhaps a bit younger than most, and he used to ram bits of tissue paper into his ears with a pencil. He used both sides to sort of try and block the voices out. I don't think it really sort of worked, but he used to do it anyway. And if you wanted to talk to him, you had to first dig out with the other end of the pencil all the stuff that he had in his ears, so that he could hear. The other reason why he would dig out the stuff in his ears would be for him to play his favourite tape, which was Metallica, Master of Puppets. That's what it was. Now I don't have a copy of that, sadly. I think I've got a recording of it on a tape somewhere, but I don't have CD or vinyl, and I haven't listened to it for years. But he used to rave on about this album. He used to say something about the amazing space vocals. I don't know. I mean, he for some reason this particular record or tape spoke to him, and he used to play it on the ward's tape player, and all the other schizophrenics would get up and walk away, and he would just stand there bobbing his head to it like that, and it would kind of really give him some sort of a kick, I suppose. I don't know, but so I learnt to appreciate that album there. I mean, I liked heavy metal at that time anyway, so I didn't really mind. I thought it was quite interesting, and I think he and I bonded because I could speak that heavy metal speak, whereas the other kind of men in white coats that worked there really had no interest. So technically, it wasn't in somebody else's house, it was in somebody else's home because it was an institution, and that's where he lived. Happy memories from that time. Okay, so I was married to a Swede, and around about the turn of the century, the marriage sort of came to an end, and we broke up. Had quite a painful divorce. Divorces are painful, aren't they? But eventually, I sort of met someone new, and I'd spent maybe about 4 or 5 months on my own in Sweden, and in the winter time, it gets very dark and cold, so you don't go out much unless you really have to during those winter months, and it's quite easy just to sort of lock yourself away and hibernate, if you like, which is what I did, and I sort of buried myself in making a database of all my records and cassettes and CDs, and in principle I still use that database now, Um, so anyway, so eventually, by the time the spring had come, I'd sort of gotten over the worst of it, I think, and started to sort of pick myself up a bit. And I eventually met a young lady called Jenny, who lived on the other side of Stockholm, and eventually, the first time I went back to her apartment, she put on this. Now, at the time, yeah, I was very much into heavy metal, and particularly Motorhead, for instance. So when she put on this, normally I would have, you know, closed my ears off. Right? But I think because it was quite a different situation, and because I'd sort of gone through this quite bleak time, I seemed to be quite open to listening to something different than what I would normally. And there's something quite special about this album for me, in that yeah, it's quite healing, I suppose. I mean, the first track, "By Your Side," um, yeah, without sort of getting too sentimental about it, it's very much a sort of comforting, consoling type song. And I mean, the whole album is just so very, very nice. It's like a warm blanket in many ways. And I sort of completely absorbed this album, and whenever I listen to it now, it always takes me back to that time. So the last record that I'm going to show is this. This is Booker T and the MGs, Soul Limbo. Great record. Certainly the first of theirs that I collected. And I first heard this at a house owned by my friend Martin Atterby and his wife Suzanne. They live in Katrineholm in Sweden. Now, that's a town where we used to live before we moved to Wales, and we still have a house there. And we used to get together with Martin and his wife Suzanne. Well, what should we say? At least once a month, I suppose. We used to get together and play board games. My wife's a big stickler for board games like Ticket to Ride or Settlers of Catan. And we'd play a board game or two, and we'd drink some wine, and we'd always listen to some music. And I can remember one time being around his house, and he was playing a CD, and I said to him, "Wow, what's this?" Because I guess Martin's a little bit older than me. I don't know how old he is, but I'd say at least 10 years older than me, I suppose. And he always sort of enjoyed the music that I played at home on my record player. And so he was playing this CD, and I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Booker T." And I'd never heard of Booker T before at all. But I listened to it, and it just sounded amazing. I thought, "Well, I've got to get some of that." So I actually, next time I went out on the prowl for records, I kept my eye out for a Booker T record, and actually managed to find this one. So that's an album that I first learnt at Martin's house, and great it is. And since then I've collected one or two more of Booker T's records. Very great stuff if you enjoy this type of thing. Okay, everybody, I think that's just about it. I can't think of any more, James, although there's bound to be some that pop in my head later on. But, well, I'd be interested to hear from other people about their records or albums that they'd first heard in somebody else's house. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, check out my next video. Bye.